CNN held another town hall with Nancy Pelosi, who's currently the House Minority Leader, and it essentially reminded me why I can't stand Democrats. It's because they are incapable of giving you a straight answer. So I'm going to show you two clips here. The first one is going to be about healthcare, an issue that is incredibly important to me. So somebody asks her about healthcare, and watch how difficult it is for her to answer this very basic question.
I was wondering, as a teen cancer survivor and someone who lost a family member to cancer because they were underinsured, how will you and House Democrats work to ensure affordable health care as a human right as we enter the midterm elections?
Thank you. Well, I'm very proud. I'm sorry for your family's loss, and thank you. Thank God that you have survived. We all pray for you. With your permission, pray for you.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
I'm very, very proud of the Affordable Care Act. When we passed that bill, it was an opportunity of a generation for us to stand with those who did Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and now the Affordable Care Act. It was a compromise. We knew we had to improve it as we went along, and we still have to do that. But our goal is that everyone will have access to affordable care. What the administration has done is to make changes that are going to make premiums be more expensive, and that is going in the wrong direction. We spend lots of money on research in our country at the National Institutes of Health. We believe that those biblical powers to cure should be available to everyone, and that means that everyone should have access in an affordable way to health care. Quite frankly, answer to your question earlier, one of the reasons I stayed, I thought if we had a Democratic president, a woman at the table, I could go home, be with my 9 grandchildren, if they wanted me to be there, that is. They sometimes have plans of their own. But we didn't win. There wasn't a woman at the table, but more importantly, I knew I had to stay there to protect the Affordable Care Act, and that is my mission. Yeah. And so we know what we need to do to stabilize the markets. We know what we need to do to make it more affordable and more universally accepted. And what the administration is doing, sabotage, sabotage, sabotage over and over again. And that's just really unfortunate, because this is not just about good health care, affordable health care. It's about a healthy America. It's about prevention. It's about nutrition. It's about wellness. It's about so many things. But it's also a recognition that health care is a right, not a privilege. And I'll go further and say that the most privileged person in America with all the resources in the world, well, his or her health has a better chance of being the best if the poorest person in our country has access to quality, affordable health care. Because when everyone is in the loop, we learn more. We learn more. We learn more about how to prevent, how to care for, and then hopefully how to cure. So thank you for your question. This is a big value. And the fact that in the tax bill, they stripped perhaps 13 million people out by eliminating the mandate is really almost sinful.
So, first of all, before I get to Nancy's response, I do want to say that I think that the person asking that question was being a little bit too kind to Nancy Pelosi, and she worded it in a way to give Nancy extra wiggle room, which you don't want to do. She asked how Democrats would work to allow affordable health care as a human right, but what she should have asked is how Democrats are going to work to ensure healthcare itself as a human right. Because if you believe something is a human right, then you can't be excluded from said human right if you're poor. So access to healthcare doesn't really mean anything. It's healthcare which is the goal that we want. But nonetheless, I'm going to read you Nancy Pelosi's response. Quote, "Well, I'm very proud. I'm sorry for your family's loss, and thank you. Thank God that you survived. We all pray for you. I, with your permission, pray for you. I'm very proud of the Affordable Care Act." Mother of God, Nancy, just answer the question. Just answer directly. Just go straight to the question. You don't have to compliment her. You don't have to espouse any platitudes. I mean, or if you're going to do that, simply say that you're sorry for her loss and then get directly to the question. But there's all, this tap dance around it. And I think really what she's doing is kind of filibustering here. I think she's trying to give herself enough time to think about how she wants to tap dance around the question. And really the question itself, it was framed in a way that allowed Nancy Pelosi, I think, to obfuscate enough to make it seem as though she was in favor of something like universal healthcare or healthcare as a right, when in actuality, that's not even how the question was framed. Now, what she gave here was a total non-answer. She essentially said that the Affordable Care Act was great and we still need to improve it, but here's what Donald Trump's administration has done to ruin it. Now, I've said this once, I'll say it again. You can't just talk about what Republicans are doing wrong. You have to come up with solutions yourself. But before she actually ended up getting to her answer, she veered off in another tangent, saying, one of the reasons I stayed, I thought if we had a Democratic president, a woman at the table, I could go home, be with my 9 grandchildren, if they wanted me to be there, that is. Such a weird thing to say. Are your grandchildren going to be like, Grandma, fuck off, we don't want to be around you? I mean, this is such a weird thing to say. They sometimes have plans of their own. We didn't win. There wasn't a woman at the table, but more importantly, I knew I had to stay there to protect the Affordable Care Act, and that is my mission. So she then goes on, again, to talk about how what Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing is sabotage, sabotage, sabotage. That was a quote from her. But she's avoiding telling us what she wants to do to improve healthcare. And look, hypothetically, let's say Democrats win back all branches of government, they stabilize the markets, reinstate provisions of the Affordable Care Act that Trump and the Republicans gutted. I mean, look, if that happens, does anyone want to guess what would happen the next time Republicans take over government? They would then attack the Affordable Care Act, gut it, and then Democrats would campaign again on restoring the Affordable Care Act, and it's just going to be a never-ending cycle. So what she's essentially advocating for is the same cycle to be repeated again and again and again. She's not proposing anything meaningful that would actually advance this conversation, and she even explicitly stated healthcare is a right, not a privilege. But Nancy, the problem with that statement is that it's meaningless when you say it, because you do believe that healthcare is a privilege because you don't want to guarantee healthcare as a human right. You want to guarantee access to affordable healthcare as a human right, which doesn't really mean much. Yes, the Affordable Care Act was a step in the right direction, but under the Affordable Care Act, there were still 30 million Americans that were uninsured. So you didn't mention Medicare for all. You didn't even mention a public option. So you can't say with a straight face that healthcare is a right if you are not willing to propose legislation or support legislation that would guarantee healthcare as a right. So with all due respect, Nancy, you're a liar. Someone who thinks healthcare is a right would advocate vociferously for Medicare for all and not do this tap dance around a simple question and go on multiple tangents about grandchildren and, praying for people. Just directly answer the question. But I mean, she wasn't done tap dancing because she was asked about the NFL players, or the NFL rather, and their new policy requiring players who want to kneel during the national anthem to stay in the locker room. And again, she just couldn't give a straight answer.
When the anthem comes on, you stand. If you do not want to stand, stay in the locker room. If you come out onto the field and you kneel or you in other ways protest, you will be fined. Are you okay with this rule change by the NFL?
I would be more okay with it if they had consulted with the players. I don't think the players agreed to this. This was the owners. And by the way, it's the owners who would be fined. I love the national anthem. I mentioned earlier to Jesus that I'm from Baltimore. That's where it was written during the War of 1812. So I'm very possessive of it. Sometimes people say, maybe we should change the national anthem. No, I'm from Baltimore. I love the national anthem, and I love the flag. Our homes are all decorated with flags. It's such a beautiful thing. And I love the First Amendment. And I'll just leave it at that. I love the First Amendment.
So if you've thought deeply about this issue and you actually have a stance, this is how you answer that question. I'm absolutely against that policy because if it is the case that that flag really is the embodiment of freedom and rights, then making players hide and basically silencing them and wanting to speak out, well, that undermines everything that flag stands for. But instead she says, I'd be more happy with it if they consulted the players first. And you see, this is another problem with Democrats. They can never just be against something because of their principles. They can only oppose things based on technicalities. For example, they were against Trump bombing Syria because he didn't consult with Congress first. They didn't speak out against how, bombing them in and of itself was wrong and illegal and against international law. And similarly, Nancy here is against the NFL banning protests because they didn't consult with players first. Why can't you just state your position without including 100 different stipulations and caveats? Why can't you just say, I'm against this policy? Why can't you give us a straight answer? And it's why normal citizens don't like politicians. It's because this is slimy. They refuse to answer questions, and that's what we don't like about politicians. That's why Bernie Sanders is so appealing, because he's not rehearsed. He doesn't consult with polls or listen to focus groups about how he should word things, and that's why Donald Trump was even appealing. Just say what you believe. If you're in favor of what the NFL did, then just say it. Just take a stand. But nonetheless, she didn't, and she did another tap dance. Instead, we got another tangent, actually. So she states, I love the national anthem. Awesome. I mentioned earlier to Jesus that I'm from Baltimore. That's where it was written during the War of 1812, so I'm very possessive of it. Sometimes people say maybe you should change the national anthem. Nope, I'm from Baltimore. I love the national anthem, and I love the flag. Our homes are all decorated with the flag because it's such a beautiful thing. It's kind of weird. And I love the First Amendment, and I'll just leave it at that. This is why their own base loathes them, because they can never say anything substantive. And look, to be fair, it's not just Nancy, it's not just Democrats. Republicans do this all the time as well. But, you're really insulting the intelligence of your base with these types of answers. Nancy, we know that you've thought about these things. How could you not if you're so heavily and deeply involved in politics? We know you have an opinion on this. Just tell us. If we disagree with you, we'll disagree with you. But it's insulting to give us these non-answers repeatedly and try to basically pass them off as being meaningful, deep responses. They're not, Nancy. We just want you to tell us the truth. But again, the reason why Nancy Pelosi is having to do this tap dance is because, on one hand, the Democratic Party's donors within the health insurance industry don't want the party to come out and support Medicare for all. But on the other hand, she knows that the base overwhelmingly supports this policy. So she's trying to do this balancing act and walk a fine line to make sure that she appeases both sides and doesn't offend anyone. But you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to take a side. And by refusing to get on board with the policy that's morally right, which is Medicare for all, which is supporting the NFL players' need to peacefully protest silently during the national anthem, you are not speaking out, and by default, you are taking a stand against what your own base wants. So, yeah, there was more to this town hall, but these were two of the moments that stood out the most to me. So, yeah.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.